Ayla never imagined that a single impulsive decision would change her life forever. After a humiliating breakup, she married a poor stranger in desperation, only to discover he was a secret millionaire. As love, betrayal, and destiny collide, can she trust her heart again, or will secrets tear them apart? The evening was wrapped in golden hues as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting a soft glow over the lavish Malik mansion. Crystal chandeliers shimmered, the air filled with the scent of expensive roses, and laughter echoed as high-profile guests mingled in the grand ballroom. It was a night of celebration, Ayla Khan's engagement to Rehan Malik, the heir to one of the country's wealthiest business empires. Ayla stood in front of the mirror in her dressing room, adjusting the delicate diamond necklace that sat elegantly against her collarbone. She was breathtaking in an emerald green gown, her dark curls cascading down her back, and her hazel eyes reflecting an ocean of unshed emotions. But beneath the perfect picture, her heart felt uneasy, as if a storm was brewing. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was her best friend, Sarah. "Ayla, are you ready? The guests are waiting," and Rehan, she paused, observing Ayla's troubled expression. "I should be happy, shouldn't I?" Ayla murmured, her fingers trembling as they traced the necklace. "Then why does it feel so wrong?" Sarah sighed, stepping closer. "Maybe because you know deep down that Rehan doesn't love you, at least, not the way you deserve to be loved." Ayla let out a bitter chuckle. "It's not about love, Sarah. It's about power, business, and family alliances. My father says it's the best decision for our future. But what about your heart?" Ayla didn't answer. Instead, she forced a smile and turned towards the door. "Let's go." The perfect lie. The ballroom erupted into applause as Ayla descended the grand staircase. Rehan was waiting at the bottom, looking impeccable in a black tuxedo, his expression smug with confidence. He took her hand, bringing it to his lips, before slipping the diamond ring onto her finger. "To a future filled with success and power," he said smoothly. Ayla forced a smile, but something about his words made her stomach churn. The evening went on with music, speeches, and well wishes. Yet, deep down, Ayla couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. The devastating truth later that night, Ayla stepped away from the crowd, needing a moment to breathe. She walked down the hallway, pausing when she heard hushed voices coming from a dimly lit room. "You don't love her, Rehan. Why marry her?" a sultry voice whispered. Ayla's heart stopped. She recognized that voice. It was Niha, a model Rehan had been linked to in the past. Rehan's response came with a low chuckle. "Love, don't be foolish, Niha. This marriage is a business deal. Ayla's family is influential, and our merger will make us unstoppable." "But what about us?" Niha pouted. Rehan smirked. "You're the one I have fun with. Ayla is just the trophy wife my parents want. Once we're married, nothing will change between us." Ayla's breath hitched. The walls around her seemed to close in, the air thick and suffocating. Her chest tightened, tears burning behind her eyes. She wanted to storm in, scream at him, throw the ring back at his face, but she couldn't. Instead, she took a step back, her heart shattering into a million pieces. The public humiliation, she didn't know how she made it back to the ballroom. But when she did, she felt numb. The room seemed suffocating, filled with smiling faces and hollow congratulations. "Ayla, my love." Rehan's voice cut through the crowd as he approached her, his arm casually wrapping around her waist. "You disappeared on me." Ayla met his gaze, her fingers tightening around the glass in her hand. The weight of betrayal settled deep in her chest, but she refused to let him win. She forced a sweet smile. "I just needed a moment." Rehan smirked, oblivious to the storm raging within her. "Well, don't disappear again. We have an image to maintain." That was it. That was the moment, Ayla snapped. With slow, deliberate movements, she took off the engagement ring and held it up for everyone to see. The guests around them gasped, the murmurs growing louder. "What are you doing?" Rehan's expression darkened. Ayla's voice was steady, yet filled with icy venom. "I'm returning your engagement ring, Rehan." Because I refuse to be a part of your perfect little business deal. A stunned silence fell over the room. Rehan's jaw clenched. Ayla, this is not the place. Oh, it's the perfect place, she interrupted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Since you love power so much, let me give you some publicity. She threw the ring at his chest, watching as it fell to the marble floor with a sharp clink. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Then, without another word, Ayla turned and walked out of the Malik mansion, leaving behind a scandal that would be on every news channel by morning. On the edge of chaos, the cold night air hit her like a slap, but she didn't stop. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she walked aimlessly, her vision blurred with unshed tears. She had nothing left, not her family's support, not the security of a future, not even a plan. All she knew was that she had to get away, and that's when fate intervened. A small, dimly lit cafe stood at the corner of the quiet street. Without thinking, Ayla pushed the door open, the warm scent of coffee and freshly baked bread surrounding her. And there, sitting alone at a table by the window, was a man. A man with deep, piercing eyes, an air of quiet mystery, and an unexpected warmth that seemed to call out to her broken soul. His name was Zayan Shah, and he was about to change her life forever. The soft chime of the cafe door closing behind her was the only sound Ayla registered as she stepped inside. The world outside was a whirlwind of betrayal and humiliation, but in here, everything was still, warm, safe, and untouched by the storm that had just wrecked her life. She barely noticed the handful of customers lost in their own quiet conversations. Her mind was numb, her body exhausted, and yet she couldn't stop shaking. The weight of what had just happened settled in her chest, suffocating her. She had walked out on her engagement, publicly humiliated Rehan, defied her family, and now, she had nowhere to go. Ayla's legs trembled as she moved toward an empty table by the window, but before she could reach it, her vision blurred. Her breath hitched, her balance faltered. Careful, a firm yet gentle grip caught her before she could fall. Ayla looked up, startled, and met a pair of deep dark eyes. Eyes that held no judgment, no curiosity, just quiet understanding. The man before her had a quiet strength about him. His face was sharp yet rugged, his jawline dusted with stubble. He wasn't dressed like the wealthy men she had been surrounded by all her life, no expensive suits or designer watches. Instead, he wore a simple black shirt and jeans, his sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. There was an air of mystery around him, but also something inexplicably comforting. "You should sit," he said, his voice deep and steady. Ayla swallowed, nodding as she allowed him to guide her to a chair. "Water?" he asked. She nodded again, unable to speak. The man disappeared for a moment, before returning with a glass, setting it in front of her. Ayla took a slow sip, her hands still trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. The man leaned back in his seat across from her, studying her with quiet curiosity. "Bad day," a bitter laugh escaped her lips. "You could say that." He didn't press for details. Instead, he simply nodded, as if he understood without needing to ask. And for some reason, that made Ayla want to talk. Maybe it was exhaustion, or the fact that she had just lost everything, but for the first time in her life, she let her guard down. "I just walked out of my engagement," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "That explains the fancy dress and the empty look in your eyes." Ayla blinked, surprised by his bluntness. He smirked slightly. "I've seen that look before, the one people have when their whole world crashes around them." A lump formed in her throat. "And what do they do after that?" The man tilted his head, as if considering his answer. Then he simply said, "They start over." Ayla let out a shaky breath. "I don't have anywhere to start." Silence settled between them for a moment. Then the man leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "What if you did?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" His eyes held something unreadable, something deep. "What if you walked out of one life and stepped into another?" Ayla let out a dry laugh. And how would I do that? His next words changed everything. Marry me. The impulsive proposal. Ayla stared at him, convinced she had misheard. What? She whispered. The man didn't waver. His expression remained calm, his dark eyes unwavering. Marry me. Ayla let out a disbelieving laugh. That's insane. I don't even know your name. Sayan, he said simply. Sayan Shah. She shook her head. I can't just marry a stranger. Why not? He asked, leaning back. You were about to marry a man who didn't love you, a man who saw you as nothing more than a business deal. Why not take a risk and marry someone who has no expectations from you? Ayla opened her mouth, then closed it. She wanted to argue, to tell him how ridiculous it sounded, but the truth was, she had nothing left to lose. Her family had abandoned her, her reputation was already in ruins, and she couldn't go back to the world she once belonged to. Sayan watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. You need a way out. I can give you that. Ayla swallowed hard. Why would you do that? What do you get out of this? Sayan exhaled, glancing away for a brief second before meeting her gaze again. Let's just say, I know what it's like to need an escape. His words sent a shiver down her spine. She studied him for a long moment, searching for any sign of deception, but there was none. And so, with her heart pounding, and her mind screaming at her to stop, Ayla made the craziest decision of her life. Okay, she whispered. I'll marry you. Sayan gave a small nod, as if he had already expected her answer. And just like that, in the dim glow of a small cafe, Ayla Khan and Sayan Shah sealed their fates with a single impulsive decision. The reality of a new life. The next few hours passed in a blur. A quick, quiet nikah took place in a small mosque, with only the imam and two strangers as witnesses. There were no grand celebrations, no extravagant dresses, no promises of forever. Just two lost souls binding themselves together in the name of something neither fully understood. As they stepped out into the night, Ayla turned to Sayan, the weight of what she had just done finally settling in. So what now? She asked hesitantly. Sayan glanced at her before gesturing toward an old worn-down motorcycle parked nearby. Now we go home. Ayla's eyes widened. You mean? She glanced at the motorcycle, then back at him. That's yours, he smirked. What? Expecting a luxury car. Ayla hesitated, then sighed. I suppose I should have seen this coming. Sayan handed her a helmet. Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Shah. Ayla swallowed hard before slipping the helmet on. As the motorcycle roared to life, she wrapped her arms hesitantly around Sayan's waist, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had walked away from wealth, power, and the life she had always known. And now she was holding on to a man she barely knew, riding into an uncertain future. Little did she know, she had just stepped into a life filled with secrets, unexpected love, and a destiny she never could have imagined. Ayla had never lived in a house like this before. It wasn't a mansion with towering chandeliers or sprawling gardens. There were no servants waiting at her beck and call, no expensive silk curtains or Italian furniture. Instead, it was a small cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a stark contrast to the extravagant world she had left behind. The walls were painted a warm shade of beige, the furniture was simple yet comfortable, and the faint scent of cinnamon and coffee lingered in the air. It was nothing like what she was used to, but for some strange reason, it felt peaceful. Sayan placed the keys on the small wooden table near the door and glanced at her. It's not much, but it's home. Ayla hesitated before stepping further inside. Everything about this felt surreal. Just a few hours ago, she had been engaged to one of the richest men in the country. Now she was married to a complete stranger, standing in a home that didn't feel like hers. She turned to Sayan, her voice softer than she intended. Why did you do this? Sayan leaned against the counter, watching her with those deep, unreadable eyes. I already told you. I know what it's like to need an escape. Ayla frowned. But why marriage? You could have just helped me. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Marriage gave you protection. a new identity, a fresh start. No one will come looking for you now. Ayla swallowed hard. He was right. After the scandal she had caused, the media would be hunting for her, and her family. She didn't even want to think about how they would react. So Cyan continued, pushing himself off the counter. I have one rule: we don't interfere in each other's lives. You're free to do whatever you want. This marriage is just a name, nothing else. Something about his tone made her chest tighten, but she forced herself to nod. Okay. Cyan gave a small nod, before turning toward the bedroom. You can take the room. I'll sleep on the couch. Ayla hesitated. Are you always this generous? He smirked, his gaze flickering with amusement. No, but you looked like you were about to collapse back in the cafe. Ayla rolled her eyes, but couldn't fight the small smile that tugged at her lips. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be so bad. The first days of a new life. The first few days in Cyan's home were strange. Ayla was used to being surrounded by maids, luxury and perfection. Here, she had to do things on her own. On the second morning, she woke up to the scent of coffee. Rubbing her eyes, she walked out to find Cyan sitting on the couch, sipping from a mug, reading the newspaper. He barely glanced at her, as he gestured toward the kitchen. Made coffee, help yourself. Ayla blinked. You cook? Cyan raised an eyebrow. It's coffee, not a 5-course meal. She pursed her lips, walking toward the kitchen. She wasn't sure how to work the coffee machine, but she wasn't about to ask for help. She tried to press a few buttons, but nothing happened. Cyan watched her struggle for a moment before sighing. He got up, walked over, and effortlessly started the machine. How do you not know how to make coffee? Ayla crossed her arms. I never needed to. Cyan shook his head with an amused smile. You're helpless. Ayla frowned. I am not. He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. Okay, make breakfast. Ayla blinked. What? You said you're not helpless. So prove it. Make breakfast. Ayla narrowed her eyes at him, before turning toward the fridge. She had seen maids do it 1,000 times before. How hard could it be? 10 minutes later, the kitchen was a disaster. Flour covered the counter, eggshells were on the floor, and the toast was burnt. Cyan tried, and failed to hold back his laughter. Are you trying to poison me? Ayla threw a piece of toast at him. Shut up. He caught it effortlessly, shaking his head. Guess I'll have to teach you. And that's how their unusual routine began. Every morning, Cyan taught her small things: how to make coffee, how to cook eggs without burning them, how to fix the sink when it leaked. And slowly Ayla found herself enjoying it. She started feeling normal, unspoken moments, and a growing bond. One evening, Ayla sat on the small balcony, watching the sunset. Cyan came out a few minutes later, handing her a cup of tea before sitting beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Ayla sighed. I don't miss my old life. Cyan glanced at her, intrigued. Not even a little. She shook her head. All my life, I was controlled. Every decision was made for me. This is the first time I'm free. Cyan nodded slowly. Freedom comes with a price. Ayla turned to him, studying him. What about you? You never talk about your past. His jaw clenched slightly, his gaze turning distant. Some things are better left buried. Ayla felt a pang of curiosity. Who was Cyan Shah? What had he run away from? She didn't push. Instead, she simply said, well, if you ever want to talk, I'm here. For the first time since they met, something in Cyan's expression softened. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't so different after all. A moment of weakness, a moment of something more. One night, a thunderstorm hit. The rain poured heavily, lightning flashing across the sky. Ayla sat curled up on the couch, hugging a blanket. She hated thunderstorms. They reminded her of the nights she spent alone in her childhood, when her parents were too busy attending parties to comfort her. Cyan walked in, stopping when he saw her curled up. You okay? She nodded quickly, but her trembling fingers betrayed her. Cyan sighed, sitting beside her. Without a word, he pulled the blanket over both of them. Ayla stared at him, surprised. "What are you doing?" He shrugged. "You looked scared." She swallowed hard. The warmth of his presence, the steadiness of his breathing, it was comforting. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Ayla hesitated before leaning her head against his shoulder. She felt him stiffen slightly, before relaxing. Neither of them said a word, but in that quiet moment, something shifted between them. Something fragile, something dangerous, something neither of them was ready to admit. The days turned into weeks, and before Ayla realized it, she had settled into a rhythm with Cyan. What had started as an impulsive marriage with a stranger was now turning into something comfortable. But comfort was dangerous, because comfort led to attachment, and attachment led to heartbreak. Ayla reminded herself of this every night, as she lay in bed, listening to the quiet sounds of Cyan moving around in the small apartment. She had promised herself she wouldn't fall for him. But her heart had other plans. A glimpse into his past. One evening, Ayla was cleaning the bookshelf when a small, old notebook fell to the ground. The pages fluttered open, revealing scribbled words and faded ink. Curious, she picked it up, her fingers tracing the worn-out edges. She had never seen Cyan write anything. He wasn't the kind of man who carried notebooks. Ayla hesitated before flipping to a random page. "I don't regret leaving, but sometimes I wonder, if I had stayed, would she have survived?" Her heart skipped a beat. Who was she? Before she could read further, the front door creaked open. Ayla quickly shut the notebook, placing it back where she had found it. Cyan stepped inside, shaking the raindrops from his hair. He glanced at her, his brows furrowing slightly. "What are you doing?" "Just cleaning," Ayla said quickly, forcing a smile. Cyan's eyes flickered to the shelf, before returning to her face. For a moment she thought he would question her, but instead he simply nodded, and walked past her. Ayla exhaled slowly, her heart racing. Cyan Shah had secrets, and she wanted to know them. A night of unspoken words. Later that night, Ayla lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The sound of the rain tapping against the window filled the silence of the apartment. She couldn't stop thinking about the notebook. Who had Cyan lost? Why did he leave? And why did it feel like he was carrying a weight too heavy for one person to bear? She sat up, debating whether to ask him. Before she could decide, the sound of shuffling footsteps caught her attention. Ayla stepped out of the bedroom to find Cyan standing near the window, his gaze lost in the storm outside. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched into fists. "Cyan," she called softly. He didn't turn around. "You should be asleep. So should you." A long silence stretched between them before he finally sighed. "I don't like storms." Ayla hesitated before stepping closer. Why? Cyan's jaw tightened. He didn't respond immediately, as if debating whether to let her in. Then in a voice so low, she barely heard it, he said, "The night I lost her, it was raining like this." A chill ran down Ayla's spine. Her heart ached for him, for the pain she could hear in his voice. She wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but she didn't know how. "Who was she?" Ayla asked gently. Cyan's lips pressed into a thin line. "Someone I couldn't save." Ayla's chest tightened. She had seen glimpses of sadness in his eyes before, but never like this. She took a step closer. "Cyan, you can tell me." His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. For a moment she thought he might actually open up to her. But then he shook his head. "Some things are better left buried." Disappointment flickered in Ayla's chest, but she didn't push him. Instead she simply nodded. "Okay." Cyan looked at her for a long moment, before turning back to the window. Ayla sighed softly before stepping away, leaving him alone with his ghosts. The first spark of love. The next day, the heaviness between them remained. Ayla didn't bring up the conversation from the night before, and Cyan didn't offer any explanations. But something had shifted. She could feel it in the way he looked at her, in the way he lingered a second longer when their hands brushed, in the way his gaze softened when he thought she wasn't looking. That afternoon, Ayla decided to do something for him. She wasn't a great cook,
but she remembered how Sayan had once mentioned he loved homemade biryani. So she spent hours in the kitchen, carefully following an online recipe, determined to make it perfect. When Sayan returned home that evening, he froze at the sight of the dining table. "You cooked?" he asked, surprised. Ayla crossed her arms, trying to hide her nervousness. "Don't look so shocked," Sayan smirked. "Considering your last attempt at breakfast almost set the kitchen on fire, can you blame me?" Ayla glared at him. "Just sit and eat before I change my mind." Sayan chuckled, shaking his head before sitting down. He took a bite, his expression unreadable. Ayla held her breath, then a small smile tugged at his lips. "It's good." A rush of warmth filled Ayla's chest. "Really?" He nodded. "Really?" Ayla exhaled, relieved. "Thank God. I thought I messed it up." Sayan's gaze softened. "You made this for me?" Ayla hesitated before nodding. Sayan didn't say anything, but something flickered in his eye. Something warm, something unspoken. And for the first time since their marriage, Ayla saw something in his expression that she had never seen before. Affection. She looked away, her heart pounding. This was dangerous, because she was starting to fall for him. And she had no idea if he would ever be able to love her back. Something had changed between them. Ayla could feel it in the way Sayan looked at her now, not just with casual amusement or polite concern, but with something deeper, something that made her heart race whenever their eyes met. And it terrified her, because falling for him wasn't part of the plan. This marriage was supposed to be temporary, a way to escape her past. But now, her heart was betraying her, and she wasn't sure if Saim felt the same. A sudden realization. It was a quiet evening. The golden glow of the setting sun streamed through the windows, casting warm light over the apartment. Ayla stood in the kitchen, absent-mindedly stirring a pot of soup, when she heard the front door open. Sayan walked in, looking exhausted, but as effortlessly handsome as his shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly messy, and Ayla hated the way her heart skipped a beat at the sight of him. "You're home early," she said, trying to sound casual. Sayan gave a tired smile. "Yeah, I had an early meeting. Thought I'd come back and steal some food." Ayla rolled her eyes. "I'm making soup. You can have some if you promise not to complain." Sayan smirked. "No promises." She threw a dish towel at him, laughing. But when she turned back to the stove, she felt his presence behind her. He was close, so close, she could feel the warmth of his body, just inches away. "Ayla Town." His voice was softer than usual, deeper. She swallowed hard, before turning around, meeting his gaze. "What?" For a moment he didn't speak. He just looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers, as if he were trying to figure something out. Then so quietly, she almost didn't hear it, he said, "You're making this difficult." Her breath hitched. "Making what difficult?" Sayan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "This, whatever this is between us." Ayla's heart pounded. She wanted to ask what he meant, but she already knew, because she felt it too. The way they gravitated toward each other, the way their eyes lingered, for just a little too long, the way their silences spoke louder than words ever could. "Sayan," she whispered, not even sure what she was going to say. But then before she could think, before she could convince herself to stop, he reached out, cupping her face with both hands, and then he kissed her. The first kiss, a moment of fire and fragility. Ayla had imagined what it would feel like to kiss Sayan, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it. His lips were warm, firm and slow against hers, like he was savoring the moment, like he had wanted this for a long time, but was too afraid to admit it. Her fingers instinctively curled into his shirt, holding on to him like he was the only thing keeping her grounded. The world around them faded. There was no past, no future, only this, only him.
Zion deepened the kiss, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her closer. Ayla could feel his heartbeat against her chest, fast and unsteady. He was losing control.
So was she.
When they finally pulled apart, Both of them were breathless. Zion rested his forehead against hers, his grip on her tightening, like he was afraid she would disappear if he let go.
He's supposed to do that.
He murmured. Ayla forced a small, nervous laugh.
I wasn't supposed to let you. He's...
Moment of silence, then Zion cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing against her skin.
He's... But I don't regret it.
Her heart swelled. Neither did she.
But what did this mean? He's...
What were they now? The questions swirled in her mind, but before she could ask, Zion pulled away, his expression unreadable.
He's... I need to clear my head.
He said softly, stepping back. Ayla watched as he grabbed his keys and walked out of the apartment, leaving her alone with a storm of emotions she wasn't sure how to handle.
Distance, longing, and an unspoken confession. The next few days were strange.
Zion became distant, as if the kiss had shaken him more than he was willing to admit. He still spoke to her, still made his usual sarcastic comments, but there was something guarded in his eyes now, something hesitant, and it was driving Ayla crazy.
One evening, she finally confronted him. Are we going to talk about it? She asked, crossing her arms as she stood in front of him.
Zion looked up from his laptop, pretending not to understand.
Talk about what?
Ayla scowled.
Don't do that.
He sighed, closing his laptop.
Ayla.
You kissed me, she said, taking a step closer.
Ayla.
And you shut me out.
Zion clenched his jaw, looking away.
I don't want to hurt you. Her breath caught. Why would you hurt me? He stood up, towering over her, his eyes burning with something she couldn't decipher. Because it's not supposed to happen. Ayla's chest tightened. And why not? Because I don't get to have things like this, he said bitterly. Not when the past is still haunting me. Ayla's heart clenched. She took his hands in hers, ignoring how tense he was. I don't care about your past, Zayn, she whispered. I care about you.
For the first time, something broke in his eyes, something raw, something vulnerable. He exhaled shakily, lifting a hand to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear.
Ayla. She leaned into his touch. Don't run from me. Zayn hesitated for only a second, before he finally let his walls down.
He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, and in that moment, Ayla knew she wasn't just falling in love with Zion, she was already his.
Ayla had never known that love could feel like this, like fire and fragility wrapped together in one. Every time she looked at Zayn, she saw the battle in his eyes.
He wanted her.
She could feel it in the way he touched her, the way his gaze lingered just a second too long.
He warned.
But something held him back, something dark, something painful. And she was terrified that if he didn't let her in, he would walk away, and this time he wouldn't come back. An unexpected confession.
The days passed in a strange haze of tension and unspoken words. Zion was still distant, still guarded, but now there was something else too, something that made Ayla's heart ache every time she caught him looking at her.
Longing. One evening, as the city lights twinkled outside the apartment window, Ayla found him standing on the balcony, staring into the distance. She stepped beside him, letting the cool night air brush against her skin. You're avoiding me, she said softly. Zion exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I'm protecting you, Ayla frowned. From what? He didn't answer immediately.
Instead, he turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Ayla, what if I told you that I wasn't the man you think I am? Ayla searched his eyes, her heart pounding. Then I'd say, let me decide for myself. Zion let out a bitter laugh. You think it's that simple? She reached for his hand, holding it tightly.
Yes, because I know you. Maybe you don't tell me everything. Maybe you keep your past locked away, but I know you, Zayn. And she hesitated. She had almost said it. She had almost told him she loved him. Zion noticed the pause. His fingers tightened around hers. His voice quiet but urgent. Say it. Ayla swallowed. Her heart thundered.
Did she have the courage to say it first? She took a deep breath. I think I'm falling in love with you. Zion's eyes darkened, something fierce and conflicted flashing through them. Ayla, she looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. Tell me I'm wrong. Zion opened his mouth, but no words came out, because he couldn't. Instead, he cupped her face and kissed her, deeply, desperately, as if she were the only thing keeping him from breaking. Ayla melted into him, her hands clutching his shirt as he pulled her closer. When they finally pulled away, she saw it in his eyes, the truth. He felt it too. But then, just as quickly, the walls slammed back into place. Zion took a step back, his expression torn.
You shouldn't love me, Ayla. Pain shot through her chest. Why not? He looked away. Because I'm keeping a secret from you. And once you know the truth, you might not love me anymore. The secret that changed everything. Ayla didn't sleep that night. Zion's words echoed in her head, keeping her awake. What was he hiding? What could be so terrible that he thought she wouldn't love him anymore? She got her answer the next morning. She woke up to find the apartment empty. At first, she thought he had gone to work, until she noticed the small folded note on the bedside table. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Ayla, I never wanted to hurt you, but I can't keep lying. I need to tell you the truth about who I really am.
Meet me at the old cafe on Oak Street at 6 p.m. Zion. Ayla's heart pounded as she read the words over and over. Something told her that after today, nothing would ever be the same again. A past written in pain. Ayla arrived at the cafe before 6, her hands cold, despite the warm evening air. Zion was already there, sitting in the corner, his face unreadable. She sat across from him, forcing herself to stay calm. Tell me. Zion took a deep breath. Ayla, I didn't just randomly come into your life. I knew who you were before I married you. Her stomach dropped. What?
He looked down, guilt flashing in his eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I wasn't supposed to fall for you. Ayla's breath hitched. Zion, he clenched his fists. I'm saying, what are you saying? He clenched his fists. I'm saying that I knew about your engagement before it was called off. I knew about the scandal, and I knew the man who left you at the altar. A cold chill ran down her spine. How?
Zion hesitated, then said the words that shattered her world. Because he was my stepbrother. Ayla's vision blurred. No, no, this couldn't be happening. Her ex-fiancé, the man who had betrayed her, humiliated her, left her heartbroken, was connected to Zion. Her chest tightened. You knew all this time. Zion's jaw clenched. Yes, Ayla felt sick. And you still married me. Why? Zion exhaled shakily. Because I wanted to protect you. I knew what my stepbrother had done. I knew he would try to come back into your life, and I couldn't let that happen. Her head spun. So what? Was this all a game to you? Some twisted form of revenge? Zion's eyes burned with frustration. It was never a game, Ayla. I swear, everything I felt for you, it's real. Ayla stood up, her heart breaking. I trusted you, Zion, and you lied to me. Zion stood too, reaching for her. Please, just listen. She stepped back. I need time. Zion's face fell. Ayla, but she didn't stay to hear more. She turned and walked away, her heart shattering with every step. A love that refuses to fade. That night, Ayla sat alone in the apartment, staring at the empty space where Zion's things used to be. He had left. Just like that, the life they had started building together had fallen apart. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She had loved him, and he had loved her too. But love wasn't always enough, at least, not when it was built on a foundation of lies. But deep down, despite everything, a part of her still wanted to believe in him. A part of her still wanted to fight for him. And maybe, just maybe, Zion wasn't ready to give up either. The apartment felt hollow without him. Ayla sat curled up on the couch, staring at nothing, her heart aching in ways she never thought possible.
She had asked Zion to leave, but now that he was gone, everything felt wrong. His absence was louder than any words he could have said. She should have been furious. She should have hated him for keeping the truth from her. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself, she couldn't erase the way he had looked at her. With regret, with pain, with love, and that was the hardest part, because despite everything, she still loved him. Memories that wouldn't fade. The days passed slowly. Ayla tried to return to normal, but every little thing reminded her of Zion. The way he used to steal bites of her food when he thought she wasn't looking. The way he would grumble about work but secretly loved the challenge. The way his arms had felt around her the night he first kissed her. She missed him more than she wanted to admit, and she wasn't the only one suffering. Zion was drowning in regret. He had left because he thought it was what Ayla wanted, but every second away from her felt like torture. For the first time in his life, he had found something real, and now, he had lost it. But he couldn't stay away. He couldn't let her go, not when she had become the only thing that mattered. An unfinished love story.
One evening, just as the sun was setting,
Ayla heard a knock at her door. Her heart leapt into her throat. For a moment she hesitated. Then with shaking hands, she opened it. And there he was. Zion, looking exhausted, broken but still so devastatingly beautiful. They stared at each other in silence. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, Ayla, I can't do this anymore. Ayla's breath hitched. Do what? Live without you. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. Zion, I know I hurt you, he interrupted, stepping closer. I know I should have told you the truth from the beginning, but I was afraid that if you knew, you'd never look at me the same way. Ayla swallowed hard. And how did you expect me to look at you? Zion's voice was raw. Like you loved me. The words shattered something inside her, because the truth was, she did love him. She had loved him for a while now, and no matter how much she wanted to fight it, no matter how much she tried to be angry, she couldn't ignore the way her heart ached for him. Zion reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek. Ayla, I love you. I love you more than I ever thought I was capable of. And if you tell me to leave, I swear, I will. But if there's even the smallest part of you that still wants this, still wants me, then I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you. A tear slid down Ayla's cheek. She wanted to be strong. She wanted to make him suffer just a little longer. But her heart had already made its choice. With a soft, shaky breath, she whispered, You're an idiot, Zion. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I know. And then before he could say another word, she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him. The kiss that changed everything. This kiss was different from the first. The first had been filled with uncertainty, with hesitation. But this was everything. It was raw, desperate. A collision of love, pain and forgiveness. Zion's arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him. As he deepened the kiss, Ayla clung to him, her fingers digging into his shoulders, as if letting go wasn't an option. Because it wasn't. They were meant for each other, and no past, no mistakes, no secrets could change that. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and overwhelmed, Zion rested his forehead against hers. So does this mean you forgive me? He asked softly. Ayla sighed. I don't know yet, but I do know that I don't want to live without you either. Zion smiled, brushing his lips against hers. Again. Then I'll spend forever making sure you never regret choosing me. Ayla closed her eyes, letting herself finally surrender to the one thing she had been fighting all along. Love, a promise sealed in love. That night, as they lay together, in the quiet of the apartment, Zion traced soft patterns on Ayla's skin. Marry me, he murmured against her hair. Ayla's heart skipped. We're already married, idiot. Zion chuckled. No, I mean really marry me. No secrets, no lies, just us. Ayla lifted her head, searching his eyes, and for the first time there was no hesitation. She smiled. Yes. Zion kissed her again, slow and deep, sealing the promise between them. Because their love story wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was all that mattered. Ayla had never believed in fairy tales. She had never been the kind of girl who dreamt of a prince sweeping her off her feet, or a love story that defied all odds. And yet, as she stood in front of the full-length mirror, dressed in the most breathtaking ivory wedding gown, she realized she had found something even better. A love that was raw, a love that was real, a love that had survived heartbreak, lies and secrets, only to come back stronger. Her fingers trembled as she traced the delicate lace of her veil, her heart hammering in her chest, because today wasn't just another wedding. Today she was marrying Zion, for real, with no past haunting them, no secrets between them, just love. And God, she had never loved anyone more. A groom's silent devotion. Zion had always been composed, controlled, a man who never let emotions get the best of him. But today, as he stood at the altar in an elegant black tuxedo, watching Ayla take her first step down the aisle, he couldn't breathe. She was stunning, ethereal. Her soft brown eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her lips curved into a nervous yet radiant smile. And in that moment, nothing else in the world existed. It was just her, his love, his future, his everything. As he reached him, he took her hands in his, squeezing gently. "You're beautiful," Ayla smiled, her eyes locking onto his. "And you're nervous." Zion exhaled a soft chuckle. "Of course I'm nervous. I'm marrying the love of my life." Ayla's heart swelled. "Then let's do this together." And just like that, the ceremony began. Vows written in love. The room was silent as Zion took Ayla's hands in his voice steady, but filled with deep emotion. "Ayla, when I met you, I was a man lost in my own mistakes, a man who thought love was something fragile, something I wasn't worthy of. But then you changed everything." Ayla's breath hitched. Zion smiled softly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You taught me how to love, how to trust, how to live again. And today I promise you that I will never take you for granted. I will spend my life proving that I was meant to be yours." A single tear slid down Ayla's cheek. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. Taking a deep breath, she spoke. "Zion, I never thought I'd find someone who could love me despite my scars. But you did." Zion's fingers tightened around hers. "You walked into my life when I was at my weakest, and instead of leaving, you stayed. You fought for me, even when I pushed you away. And now I promise to fight for you too." She swallowed the lump in her throat, her voice trembling. "I promise to love you, even on the days we don't see eye to eye. I promise to stand by you, no matter what storms come our way. And I promise that no matter where life takes us, my heart will always belong to you." Zion exhaled shakily, his own eyes misty. The officiant smiled. "Zion, do you take Ayla as your lawfully wedded wife?" Zion didn't hesitate. "I do." The officiant turned to Ayla. "Ayla, do you take Zion as your lawfully wedded husband?" Ayla met Zion's gaze, her lips curving into the softest, most heartfelt smile. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." And before Ayla could even process the words, Zion cupped her face and kissed her, soft at first, tender, as if savoring the moment, then deeper, more desperate, more theirs. The guests erupted in applause, but all Ayla could hear was the rapid pounding of her heart. Because this wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, a new beginning, a forever, a night of love and forever promises. The reception was magical. Soft fairy lights twinkled under the open sky, casting a golden glow over the garden. Guests laughed, music played, and love filled the air. But Ayla barely noticed, because Zion hadn't let go of her hand all night. Because every time their eyes met, a shiver of anticipation ran down her spine. Because tonight, after all the chaos, all the pain, all the waiting, they would finally be alone. As the guests began to leave, Zion leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Zion?" Ayla blushed. "I like how that sounds." Zion smirked. "You'll be hearing it for the rest of your life." And before she could tease him back, he swept her into his arms and carried her away into the night. The first night as husband and wife. The apartment felt different now, or maybe it was just her heart that had changed. Ayla stood by the window, gazing at the city lights, lost in the beauty of the moment. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her into the warmth of Zion's embrace. Tired, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. Ayla smiled. Not at all. Zion turned her around, cupping her face gently. Good, because I don't plan on letting you sleep anytime soon. Ayla's breath hitched as he leaned in, his lips brushing hers, soft, slow, as if memorizing her. She melted into him, letting herself drown in his touch, his love, because this was their beginning. A story that had started in heartbreak, in misunderstandings, in fate's twisted games, had finally found its happy ending. And as Zion whispered her name against her lips, as their hearts beat as one, Ayla knew this was where she was meant to be.
Forever.